Hi there, friends. It's Mrs. Tucker. Okay, today I'm going to read through The Ugly Vegetables again. The Ugly Vegetables, remember, is Unit 2, Lesson 7 in our Journeys book. And it is a realistic fiction story, which means it could really happen even though it's a fake story. However, this one's a little bit different because the author really did have this happen in real life. So it is a true story, but because she didn't tell it all the way true, she left out some parts like her sisters. We can't call it a true story. We have to call it a fiction story because some of it is not true. It's made up a little bit. So there will be characters that act like real people in this kind of story, and there's a problem that a real person might have. And remember, our essential question for this story is, what can you learn from planting a garden? So as I read through this story, if you have your book at home and you want to look at it while I'm reading through it, it's pages 226 and 227. You can pause the video and turn to those pages. Otherwise, if you're just watching the video, just follow along, and I'm going to pause every once in a while and ask some questions and give myself some answers. So, The Ugly Vegetables by Grace Lin. Let's get started. In the spring, I helped my mother start our garden. We used tall shovels to turn the grass upside down, and I saw pink worms wriggle around. It was hard work. When we stopped to rest, we saw that the neighbors were starting their gardens too. Now I notice right away there's a vocabulary word in yellow here. It's the word shovels. Here's a good picture of a shovel. Remember, a shovel is a tool that has a large scoop and a long handle so that you can dig and sometimes lift things with it. Now, I'm going to ask myself the question, when is this story taking place? What time of year is this story taking place? Now I can use my picture clues to kind of help me. I see some grass and a few flowers popping out in the picture, but I can also use the words. The very first sentence says, in the spring, I helped my mother start our garden. So this story is taking place in the spring. Now I wonder why they're starting their garden in the spring. Why is spring such a good time to start a garden? Well, let's think about what the weather's like in the spring. The weather in the spring is usually warmer. There's lots of rain a lot of the times. And the sun stays out a little bit longer. So it's probably a good time to plant because it's good weather for the plants to start to grow. Plus the dirt gets really soft with all the rain, so it's easy to dig into the ground then. So the weather is just right for the plants to start to grow, and the dirt is just right for you to dig in it. So that's why spring's a good time to plant a garden. Now, looking at this shovel, why do you think a shovel is a good tool to start a garden? Well, if you look at the picture right here, they're using the shovels to help dig the dirt. So usually when you're planting things, you have to kind of dig down in the grass or dig down in the dirt a bit. A shovel is a good tool to be able to do that with, other than just using your hands. All right, on the next page, it says, "Hello, Irma," my mother called to Mrs. Coumarine. Mrs. Coumarine was digging too. She was using a small shovel, one that fit in her hand. "Mommy," I asked, "why are we using such big shovels? Mrs. Coumarine has a small one." "Because our garden needs more digging," she said. I helped my mother plant the seeds, and we dragged the hose to the garden. "Hi, Linda. Hi, Mickey," I called to the Fitzgeralds. They were sprinkling water on their garden with green watering cans. "Mommy," I asked, "why are we using a hose? Linda and Mickey are using watering cans." "Because our garden needs more water," she said. Now, before I turn the page, let's think about, how are the gardens different so far? How is the girl's garden different than her neighbor's garden? Well, if we go back to this page where Mrs. Coumarine was digging in the dirt, it said Mrs. Coumarine was using a small shovel. And you can see right here in the picture, there is a little shovel in her hand. She's using what's called a trowel. A small shovel is called a trowel to dig her garden. When the girl and her mom are using big shovels to dig their garden. And her mom says the reason why they need to do that is because their garden needs a lot more digging. So they have to use bigger shovels. So that's one way they're different. And then in this picture, the girl and her mom are using a hose, but her neighbors get to use these little watering cans. So that's another reason why they're different. The mom and the girl, they have to use a lot more water for their garden, and the neighbors just need to use a little bit of water so they can use the watering cans. The hose gives a lot more water than the watering cans do. So that's another way that the stories are different. Now, what are all the characters doing though to help the gardens what are all the characters doing in their gardens to help their plants grow? Well, all the characters are digging the dirt in the gardens, and they're also watering their gardens, and they're planting seeds in their gardens. So all the characters are doing the same thing, even if they aren't doing it in the exact same way. They're all digging in the dirt, putting seeds into the dirt, and giving them water. So all of the gardens will probably grow in the same way because of that. Then on the next page it says, then my mother drew funny pictures on pieces of paper and I stuck them into the garden. Hello, Roseanne, my mother called across the street to Mrs. Angel Howe. Mommy, I asked, why are we sticking these papers in the garden? Mrs. Angel Howe has seed packages in her garden. Because our garden is going to grow Chinese vegetables, she told me. These are the names of the vegetables in Chinese, so I can tell which plants are growing where. Now, look at here where the mother is writing. It doesn't, and you can see the signs that the girl is holding that the mother has already made. It doesn't look the same as what we write on our papers. The letters and everything are different. And it's because these letters are Chinese letters. And since the mother is planting Chinese vegetables, she's writing the names of the vegetables in Chinese. And can you see how they kind of look like funny pictures? The girl was saying they look like funny pictures and they don't really look like words. That's because they are different than the letters that we look at. They are more like shapes for us than the letters, whereas in Chinese, they actually look like letters for people who are familiar with that language. Now, it says on the next page, one day I saw our garden growing. Little green stems that looked like grass had popped out from the ground. Our garden's growing, I yelled. Our garden's growing! I rushed over to the neighbors' gardens to see if theirs had grown. Their plants looked like little leaves. Mommy, I asked, why do our plants look like grass? The neighbors' plants look different. Because they are growing flowers, she said. Why can't we grow flowers? I asked. These are better than flowers, she said. Soon all the neighbors' gardens were blooming. Up and down the street grew rainbows of flowers. The wind always smelled sweet, and butterflies and bees flew everywhere. Everyone's garden was beautiful, except for ours. I like that, the description, rainbows of flowers. You can kind of see that in the picture, how there's all different kinds of flowers planted, and it does look like rainbows. There's butterflies flying around and bees, because they like all of those flowers. Ours was all dark green and ugly. Why didn't we grow flowers? I asked again. These are better than flowers, Mommy said again. I looked, but saw only black, purple, green vines, fuzzy, wrinkled leaves, prickly stems, and a few little yellow flowers. I don't think so, I said. You wait and see, Mommy said. Before long, our vegetables grew. Some were big and lumpy, some were thin and green and covered with bumps, some were just plain icky yellow. They were ugly vegetables. Sometimes I would go over to the neighbors and look at their pretty gardens. They would show the poppies and peonies and petunias to me, and I would feel sad that our garden wasn't as nice. Now let me pause right here. Let's think about, how are the gardens different? So you can look at the picture of the girl's garden right here, and you can look at the picture of the neighbor's garden right there. And they look a lot different, don't they? This garden is just kind of leaves and some vines. And this garden is full of flowers. So they look a lot different because the neighbors are growing flowers. Now, the girl doesn't really seem too happy by this, does she? Look at her face in the picture. She looks kind of sad or upset or disappointed that her garden is not as beautiful as everybody else's. And it says that she doesn't really like it. She thinks they're plain and yucky and lumpy and bumpy. And she uses words to describe her garden as not being so nice. And she talks about how the beautiful flowers are much nicer. Now, even though the gardens look different, there's ways that they are the same. And so one way that they're the same is right now, both plants are growing. So in this garden, even though it's just leaves and vines and everything else, it's still growing just like the garden that has the flowers in it. Now, right now, the girl and her mother disagree. They don't agree. And they don't agree on this thing mainly. The girl does not think that her garden is better than flowers, but the mom thinks that what's in their garden is better than flowers. So right now the girl just thinks it's ugly, not as pretty, but the mom thinks that the garden is a great idea and that growing vegetables was good thinking. So that's one of the ways that the mother and her daughter, or the daughter and her mother, don't really agree on what she's planted. But I think her opinion changes as we get closer to the end of the story. Now, on the next page, it says, "One day my mother and I picked the vegetables from the garden. We filled a whole wheelbarrow full of them. We wheeled them to the kitchen. My mother washed them and took a big knife and started to chop them. 'Ayow,' she said when she cut them. She had to use all her muscles." There's that vocabulary word, muscles, right there. "The vegetables were hard and tough." "This is a showangwa," Mommy said, handing me a bumpy, curled vegetable. She pointed at the other vegetables. "This is a shanzai. That's a tunghao." I went outside to play. While I was playing catch with Mickey, a magical aroma filled the air. I saw the neighbors standing on their porches with their eyes closed, smelling the sky. They took deep breaths of air like they were trying to eat the smell. Now let's remember what the word muscles mean. It means the parts of your body that control how your body moves. Your muscles help your body move. So why do you think the mom had to use all of her muscles to cut the vegetables? Well, it said in the story that the vegetables were hard and tough. Remember, if something is tough, it's hard to cut, it's hard to chew, it's hard to break, it's hard to rip apart. So she's trying to cut the vegetables, and she's got a pretty big knife over here too. She's trying to cut the vegetables, but they're really hard on the outside. So she has to use her muscles and push really hard just to be able to cut the vegetables up. Now, the mother, it looks like, is washing and chopping the vegetables. I think she's getting ready to cook those vegetables. I wonder what she's going to make. Now, I know we already know, but we can wonder. I wonder what she's going to make. Now, if you look over here in this picture, right at the very end, it said how the neighbors were standing on their porches taking deep breaths of air like they were trying to eat the smell. And you can kind of see the way the smell floats through the air here in this drawing. So the author drew a picture to kind of show that how everybody's just kind of stopping and smelling the air, and the air smells so good that they might want to try to take a bite of it. And then on the next page, you can still see how the wind is carrying that beautiful smell across all the pages so all the neighbors can smell it. And it says, "The wind carried it up and down the street. Even the bees and butterflies seemed to smell the scent in the breeze. I smelled it too. It made me hungry, and it was coming from my house." Now this word scent, remember, means a nice smell. So it's even the bees and butterflies seem to smell the nice smell in the breeze. Why do you think the girl's starting to feel hungry? I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm making something in the kitchen, or somebody's making something in the kitchen, or when we're walking down the cafeteria to lunch and I can smell that smell, all of a sudden my stomach will start growling and it makes me feel hungry. So I think that's probably happening to the girl. She's smelling something yummy, and because it smells so yummy, it makes her start to feel hungry. And on the next page, it says, when I followed it to my house, so she's following the smell. When I followed it to my house, my mother was putting a big bowl of soup on the table. You can still see those curly lines of smell coming out of the soup. The soup was yellow and green and red. Yellow and red and green and pink. This is a special soup, Mommy said, and she smiled. She gave me a small bowl full of it, and I tasted it. It was so good. The flavors of the soup seemed to dance in my mouth and laugh all the way down to my stomach. That must have been really good if the flavors could dance in her mouth and laugh all the way down to her stomach. It must have been really good soup. I smiled. Do you like it? Mommy asked. I nodded and held out my bowl for some more. It's made from our vegetables, she told me. Then the doorbell rang, and we ran to open the door. All our neighbors were standing at the door holding flowers. We noticed you were cooking, Mr. Fitzgerald laughed as he held out his flowers, and we thought maybe you might be interested in a trade. We laughed too, and my mother gave them each their own bowl of her special soup. My mother told them what each vegetable was and how she grew it. She gave them the soup recipe and put some soup into jars for them to take home. I ate 5 bowls of soup. Looks like a really big bowl of soup she has right here, and there's some more soup right there. It does look very good. Lots of vegetables in that soup. It was the best dinner ever. Now, why do you think the author just wrote one sentence on this page? And it covered both of these pages. It was the best dinner ever. I think she wanted the picture to be able to tell us the story more than the words. You can look at this picture and you can see how the neighbors are all really enjoying themselves. They have smiles on their faces. Even the baby has a smile on his face. The dog even looks like it has a smile on his face, and the dog's eating some soup too. Lucky dog. And so it looks like everybody's really enjoying themselves. They're enjoying being together. They're enjoying the soup. And so everybody seems to be having fun just even being around each other and eating together. And the author wanted you to see that in the picture instead of just telling you that with the words. Do you think this is a good neighborhood to live in? I think this might be a good neighborhood to live in, because if we go back to the other page, here the neighbors are ringing the doorbell and they want to share their flowers because they smell something so yummy. They want to share their flowers as a trade for something that smells so yummy, and the mother invites them into the house and they all sit down together and they have a meal. So they must be a really nice neighborhood to live in, because it looks like everybody gets along and they know each other well and they go into each other's houses, like just kind of like having one big family. And then on the last page it says, the next spring, when my mother was starting her garden, we planted some flowers next to the Chinese vegetables. Mrs. Crewmarine, the Fitzgeralds, and the Angel House planted some Chinese vegetables next to their flowers. Soon the whole neighborhood was growing Chinese vegetables in their gardens. Up and down the street, little green plants poked out of the ground. Some looked like leaves, and some looked like plants. And some looked like grass, And when the flowers started blooming, you could smell soup in the air. And I think that's a very interesting end to the sentence. It says, when the flowers started blooming, you could smell soup in the air. Why do you think the author wrote that? Well, if you think back in the story, the vegetables and the flowers grew at about the same time. So when the flowers were ready to be picked and they were blooming, you knew that the vegetables were ready to be cut, because when everybody else was picking their flowers, the mom picked the vegetables and cut it and made it into soup. So now all the neighbors have the vegetables to make into soup, and all the neighbors have flowers that they can share with each other. All right, friends, thanks for listening to this story again. And tomorrow when we listen to it, we'll go through it with a reader's notebook page so we can understand it just a little bit better. All right, have a good rest of your day. Bye.